Okay, we're back, and this is the same slide we were at before, where I mentioned water, and there's some interesting things to think about with water and fungi. So, we've seen this table before of water activities, various materials that correspond to those activities, and then the organisms that can grow in them. All of these up here are bacteria at the higher end of the water activities, closer to pure water. As you get down into a lot of the cured, dried, or salted foods, they have lower and lower water activity. And what we see is most of the things down here are specialized fungi. And then these are specialized archaea. So bacteria can do almost everything in the world, and they kind of run the world, but they do not run the dry parts of the world. That would be fungi and archaea. At the same time, we'll see a bit later what can happen when water gets into an environment that's normally dry. And a way to think about it is that building materials we use, like wood in houses, we protect it from fungi by keeping it dry. So keeping houses dry lets them survive or be houses for 100 years. But as soon as you cut a hole in the roof and it rains inside, it's not going to be a house for very long, because lots of things can eat that wood if it's wet. So we'll get there. Fungi, again, can make spores. They can make them asexually or sexually. And we will look at how the sexual spores are made in a little bit. And we really won't get into this in a whole lot of detail. So, what is a mushroom? Well, you've probably seen this kind of thing. This is a mushroom used for food. And these are the gills of the mushroom. And if you magnify them, what you see is the top of each gill, or the surface closest to the camera in this picture, is a mass of these spores. And under electron microscopy, so this is false color scanning electron microscopy, we can see spores. Spore, spore, spore. Spore, 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 spore. That's what they are. These exist to let sexual spores float away in the wind. Now, mushrooms have sexual reproduction, but they don't have a male and female. There's no like anatomical difference between them. It's like a biochemical or genetic marker that makes one group and one the other. So they get these names like minus and plus from people who study them. So in the next slide, we're going to look at how a mushroom develops. I want you to understand what they are and how it works, and it's a good review of hyphae and things like that. But it would be a good idea to think through meiosis. What is that? You think back to what goes on in a developing ovary, or what goes on in the testes. It's a way of recombining our DNA, but also assorting the chromosomes that came from father versus the chromosomes that came from mother, and then giving some new combination of those chromosomes to offspring. And that's not what happens in fungi, but the same kinds of things are happening. So they're generating a nucleus that has a combination of the chromosomes from two separate parents. That's one thing they're doing. Also, it's a good idea to think haploid versus diploid. Haploid is what a reproductive human cell is, like a sperm or an egg. They're haploid. That means they have 23 chromosomes. So each one of those chromosomes, chromosome 1 through chromosome 23, they have either the chromosome from the mother or the chromosome from the father, but not both. Whereas a typical cell in a human, in your skin or your muscles, your nerves, or wherever, all the other cells have both. So they have 46 chromosomes, because for each chromosome 1 through 23, they have one from mother and one from father. So they're diploid. They have both. But again, haploid is where they have one from only one, and diploid is two. And so we will need this term. So let's think about mushrooms. So let's start here. So haploid spores. That would be these things here. So they have just the normal amount of DNA of an asexually reproducing fungal cell. So just think of this as a happy little fungal spore with no sexual reproductive stuff on its mind. It just wants to start a new hypha or mycelium. And this happens to be the minus strain. Down here, there's one of the plus strain. And they just grow and explore the world until they find each other. This one keeps growing and says, ooh, there's a minus over there. And this one says, ooh, there's a plus over there. Well, what do? They start growing, making hyphae that have both types of nuclei in them. So when they meet, they are going to make a mushroom because they're going to want to reproduce sexually. And that means what they want to do is generate nuclei, like this one or this one, that is a combination of them. That's their goal, is to make new spores that is a combination of these ones and these ones. So, the mushroom is made of cells that have multiple nuclei, like these, both types of nuclei that eventually want to combine and make new nuclei. So they fuse and they make a new nuclei, and then they go through something like meiosis, because at this point they're diploid. They have all the DNA from both parents. So then they split that up into both haploid types, and they release them as spores. And there they are. In the wind, they go off and they establish new hyphae. So these are, one way to think of it is a nucleus. Is the nucleus diploid or haploid? And here they're all haploid. So that's a haploid nucleus right next to the other type of haploid nucleus. They're still all haploid, all haploid, all haploid until in the gills, these haploid nuclei fuse to make diploid nuclei, and then they recombine and reassort and make haploid spore progeny. So diploid, haploid. And that's the cycle of what's going on in a mushroom. Different mushrooms could be slightly different, but that's the general idea. This is a slide you can skip if you want to, but I just want you to realize that that fungi have a huge impact on plants. So if we unpack this word, mycorrhizae, rhizae refers to roots and myco refers to fungus. And what this means is that hyphae can act as better roots for a plant. They can work together with the plant. The plant gives them food because plants just get carbon dioxide from the air and they use the energy from light to convert it into sugars, and they can give those to the fungus. The fungus can make these amazing hyphae that have incredible surface area, and they can just get into an environment and explore the whole three-dimensional environment. And they can get other nutrients from the environment to give to the plant, like magnesium that it needs for chlorophyll and other things they would get from the soil. So mycorrhizae help plants grow. And this agriculture is fascinated by mycorrhizae. Anybody who's trying to increase crop yields wants to make sure the right fungus grows with the crop. Some of them even live inside the plant cells. This is an example of an experiment where the same plants, otherwise identical, were grown with 3 different species of mycorrhizal fungi. And whatever one this had really likes this plant and helps it. Okay, so again, I won't test you on mycorrhizae, but that's a thing to know. Lichens are something we see every day in Oregon. They are a symbiotic association between a bacterium and a fungus, where the bacterium can do photosynthesis and the fungus can't. So the bacterium lives in the fungal cells, and it does photosynthesis. So it can make sugars from carbon dioxide using energy from light. And those sugars get, used by the fungus, and the fungus is able to attach to a surface. So they're really important in a lot of ecosystems. If you go up to the top of a mountain above the tree line, you'll see a lot of lichen growing on all the rocks if there's enough water. And that lichen is slowly adding organic matter and eventually builds up soil. And lichens are always the first things that can really grow when a volcano adds a lot of new rock to an environment. So lichens are very important. And then fungi do other things. Sometime, if we have a lot of time, I'll tell you the story of this painting. But this is a painting of the person who discovered the modern strain of the penicillium fungus. And that strain and its descendants, so it's growing on a moldy cantaloupe, its descendants were used to make all the penicillin that was sent to soldiers in World War II. World War II is the first time when more soldiers were dying from injuries than from infections. And that's because that was the first time we were able to generate an antibiotic in enough quantities to use it clinically. And it all came from that mold on that plant. And I've been to this market because that's the town where I grew up. So I get a kick out of this painting, which this painting was in my my old boss's office. And then, of course, fungi cause diseases. We'll see a lot of them in Unit 4. And then fungi can grow in walls and wood if given some water. This is what I kept alluding to. During a flood, parts of houses get exposed to water, and that's abnormal. And that allows a lot of fungi to grow. And anyone who's lived in a apartment that's had a mold problem has known that's not supposed to happen. And it really makes you understand that the way we protect our housing material from fungi is by keeping it dry. And, sealing it doesn't necessarily keep it dry, right? If it's super cold and humid, then water will condense on it. So there are a lot of things to think about. It's challenging to keep stuff dry. And fungi are involved in a lot of food production. We eat some of it. We eat mushrooms. We drink kombucha and beer. And this is yeast extract. And this is nutritional yeast. And, of course, baking. You know about that. We won't get into that. And then these are the mycorrhizae. And that's it for fungi. So this is a long video. Thanks for sticking with it. We'll talk about protists and helminths in the next one.